Day 3 of Paul Revere. They were going to make sure that no one in Boston would pay taxes on the 3 shiploads of tea that had just arrived from England. So they marched on board the ships, hauled the chests of tea onto the decks, broke them open with their axes, and dumped the tea, 10,000 pounds of it, into Boston Harbor. It was all done in an orderly fashion. No one was hurt. No other cargo was touched. The ships were unharmed. There was only one minor incident when a man found stuffing tea into the lining of his coat had to be punished. When the Sons of Liberty finished, they marched home, washed their faces, and went to bed. But not Paul Revere. Someone had to ride to New York and Philadelphia and spread the news, and Paul was picked to do it. So he galloped, his hat clapped to his head, his coattails flying, from Boston to Cambridge to Watertown, to Worcester to Hartford. Watch out, dogs on the road, watch out, chickens! To New York to Philadelphia, he went. And back, 63 miles a day. This was not swatting flies. He was back in Boston on the 11th day, long before anyone expected him. Paul Revere became Massachusetts' #1 express rider between Boston and Philadelphia. He also became a secret agent. In the winter of 1774, it looked more and more as if the English soldiers in Boston meant to make war on America. And Paul's job was to try to find out the English plans. He was far too busy now to write in his daybook. He was too busy to make many silver teapots or to whittle many teeth. Instead, he patrolled the streets at night, delivered messages to Philadelphia, and kept himself ready at all times to warn the countryside. Sometimes on his missions, things went just right. He got past the sentries, got through the snow, kept his horse on the road, and kept himself on his horse. Sometimes things went poorly. Once, the English found him in a rowboat snooping around Castle Island in Boston Harbor. So they stopped him, questioned him, and locked him up. He stayed locked up for 2 days and 3 nights. But all his riders, Paul knew, were small compared to the big ride that lay ahead. Nothing should go wrong with this one. In the spring, everyone agreed. The English would march into the countryside and really start fighting. And when they did, Paul Revere would have to be ahead of them. On Saturday, April 15th, spring, it seemed, had arrived. Boats for moving troops had been seen on the Charles River. English scouts had been observed on the road to Lexington and Concord. A stable boy had overheard 2 officers making plans. At 10:45 on Tuesday night, April 18th, Dr. Joseph Warren, who was directing the Patriot activities in Boston, sent for Paul Revere. Other messengers had been dispatched for Lexington and Concord by longer routes. Paul was to go as planned, the same way the English were going. Across the Charles River. He was to alarm the citizens so that they could arm themselves, and he was to inform John Hancock and Samuel Adams, Boston's 2 Patriot leaders, who were staying in Lexington. And Paul was to leave now. He had already arranged a quick way of warning the people of Charlestown across the river. 2 lanterns were to be hung in the steeple of the North Church if English were coming by water. 1 lantern if they were coming by land. So Paul rushed to the North Church and gave directions. 2 lanterns, he said, now. Then he ran home, flung open the door, pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat, kissed his wife, told the children to be good, and off he went. His hat clapped to his head, his coattails flying. He was in such a hurry that he left the door open and his dog got out. On the way to the river, Paul picked up two friends who had promised to row him to the other side. Then all three ran to the dock near Charleston Ferry, where Paul had kept a boat hidden during the winter. Paul's dog ran with him. The night was pleasant and the moon was bright, too bright. In the path of moonlight across river lay an armed English transport. Paul and his friends would have to row past it. Then Paul realized his first mistake. He had meant to bring cloth to wrap around the oars so the sound would be muffled. He had left the cloth at home. That wasn't all he had left behind. Paul Revere had started out for his big ride without his spurs. What could be done?